Hello and welcome to Season 2 of the Soccer Coaching Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Scott.
And I'm your other host, Mark.
In each episode, Mark and I will discuss the key topics that impact on football coaching in the foundation and youth development phases. We will share our thoughts, ideas and experiences and whenever possible include guests so we can get their insights and opinions too. Thanks for listening and we hope you enjoy this episode. Hello everyone and welcome to this episode of the Soccer Coaching Podcast. I'm delighted to say that I have another awesome guest with us today. We are going to cover some key topics around learning environments and games-based coaching. And the person we've got is a bit different because not really a pure football soccer background, which is good for us. I think it's good to look at some different sports, but it'll be interesting to get a different perspective on how different coaches can tackle some of the same problems, but across different sports. So Jack Rolfe, founder of the Coaching Lab, welcome to the Soccer Coaching Podcast.
Scott, thanks for having me. I love my football, so it's great to be on and you're doing a great job.
Oh, that's good to hear. Thank you very much. No, we're delighted to have you on, Jack. I've seen some of your work, both through what you put out on Twitter, but also from the website yourself. And it's brilliant. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to talk a bit more about that. And also some of the ways it influences some of the coaching stuff that we do across different sports. So it'll be a good conversation, I'm sure.
It'll be awesome. Yep.
First things first, we've had a brief chat before we put the record button on, but just if you don't mind then, Jack, a bit of background to kind of what you've been up to, your journey a little bit, and what you're currently doing.
I work backwards. So currently in Australia, in Perth. I've been quite fortunate that I've on lockdown in a very sunny Australia, which is awesome.
Timed that very well, Jack.
Fully intentional.
Yeah.
Originally from the UK. Hockey's kind of my background in my core sport. I consider myself a bit of a failed hockey player, which has definitely influenced why I coach and how I coach and the way I run the coaching lab. Mostly work in hockey, but now doing bits of work in other sports and ultimately just supporting more coaches and more players to deliver even better sessions than they're currently delivering.
We'll come on to the coaching lab in a minute. Where did your coaching journey start from? When did you kind of first dip your toe into it and what was your inspiration?
Yeah, very unintentionally started coaching when I didn't get selected for the England under-18 hockey squad. So out of 18 players, 9 of my mates went on to play senior international hockey. I was one of the 9 that didn't. And my coach at the time said, Rolfe, do you fancy coming to do a bit of summer coaching? And at 17, 18 years old, you do because it's fairly good money and it fills your summer holidays. And you want to give back and you want to help. One thing leads to another, one job leads to another. And coaching is now my full-time role and I get to live the dream, but very unintentionally. And I've done some qualifications, but, you know, I consider myself an apprentice still. So definitely learning still.
So you coach in hockey predominantly?
Yeah, so I used to work in education. So I used to have to do a lot of different sports, mainly coach hockey, do a little bit of football. I'm a big Arsenal fan. So I don't know if that helps my coaching, Scott. I'm not too sure.
You're great there. We're on the same page. So we share the same pain at the moment. Big Arsenal fans.
But ultimately, we're always working. Hockey is very similar to football, very similar to basketball. So the similarities of the invasion game principles and having a target at the end are, you know, almost identical in terms of the aims of the sport. So always dabbled in a little bit of everything.
So Jack, I don't know if you know, obviously you like your football as well, what it's like with regards to coaching soccer or football in the UK and how similar or different that is from a grassroots coaching perspective compared to hockey. For me, I think you're dead right. The principles of the games are very similar, aren't they? But my gut feeling here is the coaching environment might be quite different. Have you got any comparisons between the two? Have you dipped your toe in at all in the coaching world of football in the UK and to see what it's like, or have you, any stories that you've heard?
Yeah, I've been very grateful that I've spent a bit of time at Arsenal Academy, Reading Academy, and those environments are incredible. And someone from coming into a football environment, I find it quite hard if they get a lot of criticism, because if every environment was very player-centred, very player-driven, and they have a clear understanding of what they want to be, that'd be a great place. I've seen a little bit of grassroots stuff. I haven't seen load, but the environments I've seen, people absolutely love the game, and the players love the game, and that's really important. With the hockey stuff, I think we're in a slightly different position because we're very privately school focused, just because tradition would state that it has to be that way, which is one of the things I hate, because I really believe the talent is in the grassroots and in the clubs and not always in the schools. So I think there's definitely a difference from that point of view, that we're slightly more school driven in hockey than we are club driven.
Do you think the fact that it has this kind of probably more private school reputation with hockey, that it limits the uptake and the numbers, and therefore that has an impact on maybe what comes through the other end?
Yeah, I think it's one of those sports that someone has to put a stick in your hand to play it. And football, rugby, basketball, those kind of sports are in privileged positions where, because you only just need one object to go and play, literally jumpers for goalposts, whereas hockey you need a stick. So straight away that limits it. The playing surface as well, is another thing, which, those be the two big factors that would limit someone from going in. If you don't have a stick in your hand, Scott, you're probably never going to go and play the game at all, because it doesn't have the coverage that other sports have.
And do you still play, Jack?
I dabble, Scott. I try my hardest. My sister is a lot better than me. She plays for England. And she's younger. Yeah, so I always believe the younger sibling does better, but she'll see.
Yeah, I think that's probably the case. Very good. Brilliant. Thanks for that, Jack. So a bit about the coaching lab then, if that's okay, because obviously you're the founder of this, and I've seen the stuff that, I've seen parts of the website and things you got online and some of the cards, but can you talk us through how that came about and maybe tell our listeners what it's all about?
Yeah, so started when I was at university down in Canterbury, and I was about to graduate, and I was very grateful. I had a great university period where we had bursaries to connect with other coaches. There was lots of opportunities to connect, and that was great. But when I graduated, where were those opportunities going to be, and how could I share more of that style with more coaches? So the idea of literally explore, experiment, and share with kind of three underpinning principles of the coaching lab to set that up, to bring more coaches together. And I would speak about kind of unleash creativity. So we want coaches to be full of creativity and players. Almost believing that's the biggest competitive advantage you can have is creativity, to find the solutions to the problems you've got. And also, Scott, just helping more coaches, particularly at the grassroots level, where they do some of the best work with, loads of kids, but sometimes they're some of the least supported people on a whole pathway of any sport.
Obviously, that means decision making is a big part of that, because if you're looking for creative players and coaches, a lot of that starts with the decisions you make first. Was that a conscious decision on your part from the outset to focus on that particular area, or did you kind of stumble across that? And is that what led you down the kind of the match card as a resource then? So
the study was the first idea, and I'm dyslexic, so it was really important to me that a study was accessible. And I got through university just about. So my final year study was, how do we integrate psychology into practice? Went into some football academies within the UK and hockey environments, so two very similar sports, which I thought was important to have, and came away with 4 principles. So an environment is ever changing, is number one. There's transfer of responsibility, so the coach doesn't always have the responsibility. The third one, is train above the game. So there's lots of decisions, lots of intensity, physically, mentally, and tactically.
Was that train above the game?
Train above the game. So an example of that would be, if we had a training session on a Wednesday and you went to go and play a game on a Sunday, you want the training session to look and feel like the game. So when you go to the game on the weekend, players are comfortable and confident enough because they felt those decisions. Yeah. And then the last one was be reflective. So how do we wrap those experiences? And they were the 4 principles that I thought were really valuable and really, really important. But how does that become accessible to coaches? And that's how the match play cards came about, as a foundation. Make it playful, make it exciting, but without necessarily being all this psychological big words on it and being scary to the coach.
So trying to keep it simple but get the message across.
Yeah, massively.
Tell us a bit about the cards, what they are and how they work.
So literally debit card size, debit card material. We've got some individual cards. So I think it's really important that we challenge the individual within the team to, one, support them, but also provide a bit of stretch and a bit of challenge. And then there's some team challenges in there. So a bit more around the tactical element. If I was to pick a couple of examples, so you've got fast forward. No 2 consecutive passes can be backwards. Try to play forward first and fast. So there's some stuff around those team challenges. Score within 45 seconds. Scoring your last goal, it's worth triple. So there's those tactical stuff to support coaches to coach through games, and bring those principles to life. And then the last and the newest set was the reflection cards. And I think as coaches, we've all been in the situation, Scott, where we ask a question and yes or no is a response, or ball speed or space. And it's more about just generating conversation and having 50 cards and 50 different questions that just make more conversation between players, but also between coaches.
Do these work at a particular age or level or ability?
Yeah, for anybody, and that was very intentional. So there's no sport-specific language. It's a very engaging game driven, particularly the team challenge ones. But I think it was important that there wasn't a load of rules and it said, right, you have to use them for this age group and you can't use them for that age group, because straight away that limits the creativity of the coach. So there's no rules with them. And that's really important because we want the coach to coach, but also the environment as well. We want the coach to use the cards and the environment with the players that are, specific to them and who's in front of them.
Would you say that they're not necessarily theme specific? So if I was working on a particular coaching topic for the next 4 to 6 weeks with a group of players, I could almost dip into any of these cards and I'll have a look and see which ones I thought were best suited for what I was covering as a particular theme for each week, or are they kind of sectioned off into particular topics or themes?
No, so literally team and individual. So they're the only two separation, and actually they're two different colours, but they don't say team and individual on them. So
Right.
Again, there's the flexibility to use them between both, and they're just challenges to support the themes more than anything. So if you had a theme of, I don't know, playing out the back is quite big, and you think of the skill set involved and the attributes involved within that, you would just pre-select cards to support your session planning that would then bring that to life.
And how long has it been going for then, Jack?
So what are we, 18 months now? So November 2018, it's been awesome, living the dream, really, Scott. I think we're in 25 different countries and loads of different sports, which is, fantastic to see.
That's excellent. Really good. Well, I'm delighted to hear that, Jack. It's a great to hear a success story. And how much of your own background from being a player and being coached has driven this?
I think there's a couple of things in there. I don't think I played the game enough in training as a kid, which meant I was quite lucky. I suppose I was quite talented and got pushed through quite early and quite quickly, but I don't think I had the skill set mentally, because I don't think training really supported me in that. So I definitely think I lacked a bit of confidence to make certain decisions when it came to big games. Technically, I think there's a few things in there that could have been developed, but I don't think I had the opportunities enough to practice them within a safe games environment, which is, ultimately supported this, because we want more coaches to coach through games.
Very good. I think it's often the case that when you see people that are creative and maybe pushing boundaries in certain areas, a lot of it comes from their own experience and what they didn't get when they went through the process. And there's nothing wrong with that, is there? I think in many sports, you can almost pick any sport. I would say certainly in football, from my experience, the way it's changed in the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years is quite phenomenal, and certainly moved down towards more game-based realistic practices. We've moved away from more drill static cone stuff to more games-based things, and you see similar things in tennis now, in hockey, rugby. There certainly seems to be a shift, which I can imagine can only be a good thing for both the transference into matches, but also for the player experience.
Yeah, and I think for the coach as well, because I think you get better feedback if you're coaching through the game, and the game is the thing that they're going to go and play on the weekend. That's the feedback that you want, and I just think that's really, really important, that the kids have the opportunity to play through the game and to make decisions that look and feel like the game.
So I coach a couple of young little teams, but everything we do, I start with a game. And in some ways it's easier for me as the coach because the players are more engaged, so I've got to be, it's true though, isn't it? The minute you start, I know when I've designed a bad session because I get the behavioural issues, and we've got cracking kids that do not muck around, but they're just a bit bored because my practice is wrong. It's not their fault. They're 7, 8, 9 or 10, 11, 12, but they're just in a particular practice that's not engaging them, and therefore they'll just veer off a little bit. But when I've got the practices right, and often that's from a game-based starting point, and you tweak and change a few things and put some constraints in or a little bit of fun stuff in there, then I think you get more engagement, more transference, more competitiveness. They train at a higher level. There's so many benefits from doing it, and it's much more fun as a coach to be teaching that kind of session or supporting that session than it is something that it requires you to kind of keep saying stop, stand still, and be too dominant in the process.
And why do kids come to training? One, they come to learn, but they come to play the game.
Of course.
If you're going to go to training and you're not going to play the game,
yeah,
you have to ask yourself why kids come to training, and it's to learn, but it's to learn the game.
And if you're using it just as a carrot at the end, saying, if you do this X, Y, and Z, you'll get the game at the end. There seems like there's something not quite right about that.
Yeah, agreed, 100%. It shouldn't be the reward. It should be a continual focus throughout.
So we've kind of touched on it there a little bit, but if you don't mind, I'd be fascinated to know your views on the two key areas, really. And we'll try and cover one at a time if we can, although I can see there might be some overlap here. But I'd like us to look at learning environments first, if that's all right. From your experience of learning environments, A, to you, what is a learning environment? And B, how important is it that coaches understand about learning environments?
They're massively important, and I think everyone has a learning environment. Every environment that we coach in is a learning environment that we want to be in. What do I think a learning environment is? I think it's highly supportive but challenging as well, and I think the two and two come together. So you can't just have a high challenge with no support, because then you see young people and players drop out. So with that high challenge, that you would add, in-game challenges and different formats, all that kind of stuff, but also the high support with that, and that's where the coach really comes into their own, is how are they supporting the players, how are they interacting, and almost how they behaving themselves. So those would be the two big things for me, what a learning environment is. And I think the last one would be, it has some focus, and that focus necessarily isn't always short term, but is probably longer term, about what is the end in mind, what is the next 5, 10, potentially even longer, depending on the age that you're working with, of that pure focus of what are we actually going to learn and how are we going to get there.
It's a good point, especially the bit around getting the balance right between being supportive and being challenging. And I often see, well, not often see, but you can see where even good learning environments where that's in place, where it can often break down is there's a general support and challenge for the base of players, but not necessarily on an individual basis. So some are happy swimming in that level, and there's others there that are kind of not being challenged enough, and others that are being too challenged. And it's hard, particularly for grassroots voluntary coaches, often parents just stepping up and helping out, to be able to differentiate in a group environment to make sure everyone's getting individually a good amount of stretch, support and challenge. Do you see that? Was that something you'd support, Jack? And is there any ideas about how coaches could manage that?
Yeah, I love my football, Scott, and you see it in the Premier League. When a manager gets sacked, why does the big guy up front who hasn't scored for 5 games suddenly go and score the next game? And it's probably because the coach has had conversations and really worked with that player, not worked with them separately away from the group, but just understood that person that's in front of them and kind of almost asked them more questions. Yeah. When are you at your best? How can I support you as the coach? They're sorts of questions or even a question like, what's stopping you from performing? Just little things like that, and that might come back to, or how am I stopping you from performing as the coach? What am I putting in the way that's stopping that individual? And I think that's one lesson we can really learn from the Premier League and from, I suppose, all football, that when a manager gets sacked, they're probably having good conversations with their players in front of them.
Yeah, so it's knowing your player individually, isn't it, and having those conversations on a one-to-one basis where you can, and that getting to understanding. And you mentioned then about the importance of thinking long-term. How can a coach create a learning environment that isn't focused on the here and now, and the players within that environment feel like they've got time to learn and develop a particular skill or skill set?
I would ask the players, number one, and I think that's important. I think it's important as coaches that we understand why players are at sessions and also where they want to be. So particularly at a grassroots level, it's going to be very mixed ability, mixed age groups at times. But where does that player, Johnny, where does Johnny want to be in 5 years' time? And can we support him to be in that? So I think it's really about understanding the players you've got, but also asking them the questions about, well, where do you want to be? How can I help you get there? And giving good role models, I think is an important one. So there's always a role model that is above them in terms of maybe ability or age, or even within their group, but something that says, right, I can work towards that, which to me is that long-term element.
What about ownership, Jack? How important is player ownership of the learning environment, and how can coaches encourage that?
I think it's a huge buzzword, Scott, that I think we say we do, but I don't know how often we actually do it. A prime example would just be a coach's behaviour on the sideline, I suppose. So I have a rule as a coach for me as an individual that when my players are on the ball, I probably wouldn't say something to that player. I give them the ownership to make the decision. So that's one super easy example of, you don't speak to the player or give instructions to the player that's on the ball, so they can have the ownership to go. I think there's also little things like half time. If the coach didn't speak for the first 2 or 3 minutes and put the ownership on the players, they would probably have the opportunity to speak because the coach has withdrawn and just listened in. So I think there's little things we can be quite really clever about, just as coaches, to say, right, we are going to give ownership here, and also who you're going to give the ownership to. So you might not give it to the whole team. You might decide to give it to certain individuals who then need to share that with a wider group.
I think it's key, isn't it? And you're right, trying to find clever ways to do it, but it's got to be sincere. I think players will see through it if it's just, a moment here or a moment there, but suddenly as a coach you're stepping back in again and taking over. Players see through that straight away. They've got to genuinely feel like it's their session or it's their match. But the benefits for doing that are huge. I think if you want independent, creative decision makers in games, which I think we all do, whether that's whatever sport you're playing, it's great to have that in the team that you've got, and almost make yourself redundant as the coach as much as you can. You have to create that in the training practices, right? And the environment you create overall. Because if the environment doesn't support that, the players won't step up to challenges because they don't feel they can. And it is about being clever, isn't it? And finding cute, clever ways in which you can really genuinely create that environment for the players that you've got.
There was something on Sky Sports recently. I think it was a football club in Sweden, or a very small kind of footballing country, and their academy director said, "We want 11 coaches on the pitch.
Yeah,
we don't want 11 players. We want 11 coaches."
Yeah,
and to me, that is the ownership, that you've given the ownership for them to lead on the pitch, but you've put them in a position that they're confident enough to make decisions. And I think that's where the training and the game really link together.
So go on then, Jack, I'm going to put you on the spot now. Your learning environment. So if I come and see one of your training sessions and I observe it, or even worse still, I speak to your players, how would they describe the learning environment? Or what would I visually see, or how would they describe the learning environment that you create? You could be as honest as you want. No one's going to hold you.
No, I'm pretty honest. I think if you came to see me coach, I would like to think you have a clear understanding of what the session's about. So there's some real learning going on, as in we're actually seeing maybe what we want to see. I think you'd see a lot of players having conversations between themselves, maybe about what's for dinner, but also about the game. And I think it's important that players have conversations between themselves. There'll be definitely some sort of reflection in there, because I think that's where the learning happens. So you're between the action, the reflection, and then the next action. That's where the learning is. So whether that's through video, so we do a lot of video pre-session, or even sometimes during on the iPad with the younger kids. What else? What would they say about me, Scott?
Yeah, go on. That's the important bit. What would the players say then? Oh, how old are the players, Jack?
We work across a range. So the technical director stuff at the club would be mainly on the kids' side, and then going towards the adults, and there's more performance and more state girls and boys, and some pushing for national programs. So there's a real end of the spectrum, but the learning environment is very similar. I think my coach behaviour is probably quite similar. I don't like to talk too much, and I'd like to think that my transitions between exercises, and that's one thing, Scott, I've taken from football, is every environment I've been into, the transition between exercises is really, really smooth. So I would often try and put cones out or put the bibs out, and that obviously takes away a little bit of the ownership, of course, but it also creates the ownership because they can get straight on with the exercise and they can lead that because they know what's coming. So that's definitely one thing I've taken. I think they would say I like to have a chat and I like to coach, and I call it a coach's heat map. So I'd like to think that if I had a GPS on me as a coach, I wouldn't be stood in the same position. I'd be speaking to a lot of different players during the game, probably pulling a couple of players to the side, and I like pulling a player off and having a conversation, because their teammates have to adapt and realise they've lost their left defender or whoever, but also then the opposition have to adapt. And that's one easy way of promoting that self-organising, that ownership, that I'm not going to tell them, they've got to recognise that.
You know what, Jack? It's so funny because I think this is part of the coaching evolution as well. The idea when you first start coaching to take one of your own players off to have a chat with them while the game's going on is just horrific, isn't it? And I remember seeing a QPR coach a few years back. We went to watch one of their academy sessions, and they were playing, it was a Wednesday night, I think it was their under 10s, and they had invited another academy down to play against, like they do. It was games night. And I watched the coach, and they were playing 5v5, or it might have been 6v6. But during the game, he kept putting off one of the players, having a little chat with him. So there was a player down. He didn't care about the score, obviously. It wasn't bothered. It was different players. And it was just fascinating to watch. And it was fascinating to see the other team then step up to try and exploit the space left behind. The other team working harder to keep the ball. And these were young players, and it was, for me, it was one of those light bulb moments you get from observing other coaches, thinking, you know what, that's the important thing here. The score does not matter. You're given the opportunity for the players to be tested in different ways, but also that real valuable one-to-one time with the player in the moment. To be fair, the players are desperate to get back on the pitch, aren't they? So you can't make it last too long. But also, they like it. They like having that 30 seconds off just to have a chat. And then the benefit of that 30 seconds or a minute, it may be, but it's often not that long, with the one player. Then they go back on, you see the impact of that conversation in the game. It's instantaneous then, and you can see it. And it's worth whatever sacrifice, if you want to call it that, you may have made during that 30 seconds, having them off the pitch. So it sounds very similar to what you might be doing there.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest thing, that you can give the feedback and you can give the challenge, whether that's an individual challenge or going to be a team challenge or whatever that might be. You can give them information that they can then go and put into action.
Yeah.
And you know what it's like, Scott, don't you? When we decide to debrief the session at the end and we say, right, do you remember when you did this? And they don't remember it.
Yeah.
But if you can, do it through the game, that's the most unique element of it. I think for me as a coach, I did it a lot, all the time. And I often forgot when the kid went back into the game of why I pulled them over.
Yeah.
So they went back in the game and I never reminded myself of, okay, I'll put them in, but can I check back up on the challenge or the question I've given them? So that would be the other element of that, is if you're going to do it, just remember why you pulled them over and be continual.
Such a good point, Jack. That's a really good point. So you kind of revisit it again after the moment, aren't you? I do think on debriefs, I'm not saying they're pointless, but that kind of 5-minute end of session, talking about the session afterwards, for me, it has very limited impact. Maybe the way that I'm doing it, for two reasons. One is I think the kids I work with, by the age they're at, they're not really, they know it's just the nonsense bit at the end, if you like. They like we do a trainer of the week award. They like that bit, but the actual chat around the session is almost pointless. Also, if I've got any points to make, really good or bad, well, good I guess is okay, but certainly things around what we could do better, they haven't got a chance to fix it now anyway until the next training session. So I'm almost better off not saying anything, and I've got a bit better. It's not perfect, but a bit better, kind of almost parking my more constructive feedback comments until the next session when we can actually get back into it straight away and do something about it. So I think either having a debrief before the end of the session, so maybe like either 3/4 in or something, or just just before you actually finish off, not if you're still playing almost, so there's a chance to look at some of that stuff, or just holding on to some of that things until the next session has more benefit. Because from my experience, the kids have stopped listening to me after about 25 seconds anyway.
Yeah, I agree in a way, Scott. I think it's something I've done as well, and I often now frame the debrief almost a bit of a brief. So actually, that at the end of the session, you're linking that to the weekend that you're going to go and play, or to the next session. So that question might be just one thing you're going to take from the weekend to then put into your game. So yes, you've reflected, but you've linked it to the next element, to the next action.
Yeah,
so you're almost briefing what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
I think that would just be one thing on that.
Yeah, good point. And final bit on learning environments then, unless you've got anything to add, but just you mentioned a bit about games, stuff like that, and you said you don't say too much, and your interventions are quite, obviously purposeful, but more one-to-one. You come across very calm, cool and collected, Jack, and I'm sure you are.
Yeah.
I wonder, and what I'm struggling to see in your sessions is chaos. Is there chaos in your sessions? Because there's chaos in matches, right? And I wonder whether or not that's something you have in your sessions. And if you do, is that deliberate that you manufacture, or do you allow that to happen through just maybe the way the sessions unfold?
Yeah, I think to add a bit of context, I suppose the players that I'm working with, definitely at the performance end, I think I'm quite intentional around how I behave. So if I need to be a little bit angry to cause a reaction, I will, because I know that behaviour change in the coach will have an impact. And again, if I need to be really, really nice and really happy with certain individuals, I'll do that. But as a coach, to almost manage my behaviour because of the people I'm working with. And also the players want that a little bit. They want that direct feedback at times. And particularly when I was a player, that sometimes I wanted someone to tell me if I'd done something wrong 5 times, I want someone to help me. I do add chaos, 100%. I think you'd always see me with 2 or 3 balls in my hand rather than just one. So if the ball goes out, I can roll another one in. We do a lot of games with no sidelines. We do a lot of games with very quick turnover. Best of 5, play 3-minute games, play best of 5. So lots of chaos, lots of excitement, because ultimately that's what the game is going to ask players to do. So Yeah, I can be a nice guy, but hopefully I can be a bit chaotic as well.
I guess that's back to knowing your players, isn't it, as well, and knowing which buttons you can press in a constructive way. That some players do need a bit more of a direct approach, and others need a bit more soft approach. But if you know that, then you can manage it accordingly.
And time of the season as well, Scott. I
Good
suppose
point.
it's really early on in the season. I think we're going to be very different to the end of the season or coming back from Christmas or whatever that might be.
Good point. And I guess their moods as well, because players come different weeks with different issues and problems and things. Sometimes they're up for a bit more of a challenge. Other times they want to be left alone, right? Again, if you can get a sense for that as a coach, that helps you maybe make better interventions with your players on a one-to-one basis.
Yeah, I have in my book, I think I have every single player in my squad and what they've come from to come to training. So
Yeah.
I know that two of the guys will come straight from university. I know one of the girls will come straight from school. The other will finish work, and that from 5:30 they have to be on the pitch by 6, and then we train till 8. So I've written all that kind of stuff down. So for me, I try and really, really understand that individual in front of me.
Well, and I'm going to move on to games-based coaching in a minute, Jack. But just my final question, I promise you. What about free play? Is free play part of what you have in your sessions? Is it something that's fixed in there, or you do it regularly, or not at all?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think when we say play, to me it means freedom. But if I don't give any play, there's no freedom to play. And I want players to be themselves. I don't want them to be a copy of me or a copy of another player. I want them to be themselves. There has to be an element of play freedom in there. I would often leave the balls straight out at the start of a session and intentionally almost block that into a session that there is 5-10 minutes at the start where I'm not going to do anything, that they are going to literally go and play and treat it like a playground for 5 minutes. And as more kids turn up, you might see a 1v1 happen, then a 2v1, then a 2v2, and the game just builds up. But if we lock all the equipment away before as the session starts, and I think it's a valuable time, that 5-10 minutes. Allow it to be in your sessions.
It gives you a chance, doesn't it? If you can observe the free play, it's quite interesting because you then see, back to your point about where they come from before they get to your session. If they've had a bad day at school or uni or work, maybe that 5-10 minutes just playing, just blowing some steam off, just having some freedom without the coach in their ear, seeing their mates again and transitioning their brains a little bit from, okay, I've had the grief from the last 2 hours, but now I'm here now. I can get my kind of my training head on. It's good to see. You can see the ones that are a bit quieter maybe that day. You just get a feel as a coach. I think observing free play can really help you then drive your session for the next 90 minutes or so because you got an insight to how the players are.
And I think sometimes I add a bit of a focus to it, which, I don't do all the time, but, we might say, right, go and explore 1v1 and it's got to be there's got to be an element of this in there, or there's got to be an element of that in there. So there's that element of free play, but also quite directional, I suppose.
Yeah.
So just to help some of the kids, if anything, just plant a seed, just so they can give them the seed. Yeah, and they grow.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jack. That's excellent. So I appreciate all that around the learning environment. And I think it kind of moves on nicely to talking a bit about games-based coaching then. And I know this is a phrase, and I think maybe everyone's got their own different interpretation of it, and maybe it varies from sport to sport as well. But I'd be interested to know, given the work you're doing with the coaching lab and just your own background and stuff, what's your view? What's game-based coaching look like to you? And is it something that you're using in your sessions?
Yep, it's 100% something I use. I think every coach does use it, and they have a dial. They either decide to turn that dial quite low and don't use it, or turn that dial quite high and use it. It's a very trendy topic, but it's not a new topic. So everyone has played games ever since we started playing sport. So it's not necessarily a new topic and one that should be scary. What would it look like to me? There'd be some sort of opposition. There'd be some sort of focus. There'd be some sort of challenge and outcome to it. There'd be a bit of feedback. So the game would probably give that feedback element to it. Player-led controls. There'd be some sort of time-led challenge in there. How many can you do in this amount of time? How many can you do in that? Or 2 lots of 5 minutes is a time. I think the common misconception of it, Scott, is that it has to be 5 versus 5, or a game as we know it. Whereas actually, could we have a 1v1 or a 2v2 down a certain area is exactly the same as a game. If there's an opposition, which is a flexible number, there's some sort of challenge and outcome and feedback to it. And just a level, you get 100 points for this and 200 for that or whatever, but there's some sort of level of complexity that It's not super easy for players.
I think that element of competition and opposition and a challenge and a target for everyone that's involved just ups the intensity, doesn't it, of the session. It just gives the players more of an incentive, whatever they're doing, to get involved in it, which I think makes a big difference. What do you think then, for coaches that adopt a game-based approach, what are the benefits?
What are the benefits? I said it earlier, but you get feedback. And as coaches, that's hard to get. And if we're going to coach for a game, you're going to get the feedback, because if the players aren't doing what they need to do, or what you've tried to coach them, and they're not doing it in the game, that's the best feedback you can get. So number one, I think you get some feedback. Number two, I think you see players in a different light. As a player, I hated the drill, and I was probably quite good at them, but it didn't help that I was quite good at them, because in the game I didn't do it. So I think there's that element of, we see our players in a different light because they want to play the game, and that's really, really important. I think you slowly start to see them mentally different, and what I mean by that is probably more confident because they're making more decisions, more tactical because they're going to be more self-aware of what's going on around them, and then also they can lead their teammates because they're being given certain messages by the coach to share, or whatever that might look like, but ultimately they're communicating with their teammates, which is really important, and their teammates are their peers, which is critical.
How much do you allow the players to give each other feedback?
I think there's a time and space for it, 100%. And I think often the feedback driven by players is from player to player is often more powerful than from the coach. I think we have to be careful of who's given that information and how they're given it. But I also think you can prime the kids. So you might say, right, Scott, who have you recognised done something really, really well today? And then you would go and get that person to go and share that information and recognise and give that feedback. And I think that's why we designed some of the cards as well, was just to create questions for players to get feedback. But I think it's important, Scott, because they need to be self-aware of themselves, but also what's going on around them. And it's good role models for them.
It's a good skill, isn't it? And it comes back to our first point really around learning environments, that if you can create the right learning environment, then that certainly increases the opportunity for players to own some of that feedback, right? You don't want one player berate another player, because that's not going to be positive. But if they can constructively give feedback, guidance, advice, support, encouragement, then it's much more powerful than it's coming from me or from you, isn't it? It's going to, player to player has a much more big impact than coming from coach to player.
Yeah, and it's the player's game. It's not about the coach.
So true.
I have to do a couple of team photos, and I absolutely hate it because it's not about me. I absolutely hate it. It's about the players, and it's their game. It's not my game. I need to park my ego on the side, and it's about the people in front of me, the young people in front of me.
I have one little pet hate, Jack. It's true that I'm the same with you in the photos, probably for different reasons, but I always have bad hair day. But it's their team. I don't want to be in the photo. It's their team, isn't it? And I ask the players, whose team is it? And I say, it's our team. I'm just here to maybe facilitate because they're too young to do it on their own right now, but hopefully one day they'll be doing it themselves without me being around. But I have a little pet hate, and I do find myself doing it sometimes. So again, I'm not pointing fingers, but when you're talking to the players and you say, "Oh, can you go and do this for me?" or "I would like this," or I really, when I catch myself saying it, I hate myself for saying it, and I try really consciously not to put me or I in any of the sentences. It's what do you want to do and how you can make it work for you and stuff. And I think those little words and even the body language, or even where you stand on the pitch, you said about keeping yourself out of the middle of the pitch. It's so hard not to want to be in the middle. And I think if you're a good coach, or not a good coach, if you do it in a clever way, it's probably okay. But for most coaches, if you're in the middle of the game, again, you're owning the session almost too much, and you need to kind of remove yourself the best you can, support and influence and facilitate, but don't dominate the practices, because anything else you do then to try and create the ownership will probably be undermined by the other stuff you've done already. But it's not easy. And I know that from my own experience.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think the actions and our behaviours and our words ultimately are actions to the players. So what we say, what we do, and how we act is a determinator, and is almost a session plan in itself. Because if we're going to act in a certain way, that's probably might be a limiting factor, or it might be a thriving factor to the players we've got in front of us. And I think that's important.
And it's so tricky, particularly if it's not your profession. If you do this as a volunteer and you're just working on the weekends with maybe your kid and the group of players. And that's where I come back to your cards, Jack. I think from what I've seen them and how I think they're fantastic, but I can see them being a massive help, particularly, I'm for all coaches, but particularly for grassroots coaches and maybe doing this on a voluntary basis. Because what it enables you to do is get some real kind of quick, easy wins that, they're great kind of little instructions and ideas around either a game or a bit of reflection, but also it just helps you remember that it's more, every one of them is about the player, not necessarily about the coach, and it gives that ownership back to the players. So if you struggle to do that stuff automatically, and we all do at times, I'm sure about that, I certainly do, having a resource like that is just a useful little tool to have in your toolkit, if you like, just to remind you that actually I've got some tricks here that I can use that takes the emphasis off me as the coach and positively puts it back on the players.
And just creates a bit of a space for coaches to think. I think more than anything, think before the session and obviously during and after, but just creates a space of just, a free space where the players are in control and the coach is having to think about other stuff related to the game that's in front of them. But I think just creates a really nice, comfortable space that the coach is thinking about the game, thinking about the players, and thinking about the environment, which are, three critical areas.
Yeah, getting yourself a minute or two to kind of get your thoughts together is another really good tool to have as a coach, isn't it? And not be spontaneous all the time in the moment. It's good to be able to think on your feet and react, but actually, if you're not quite sure, give yourself a minute or two somehow. And again, the cards work well for this, just to get your thoughts right, because then hopefully whatever intervention or action you're going to take is going to be more positive or maybe more articulated better than it might have been otherwise.
And there's no rush, Scott. There's no rush at all. And, I talk about a kind of a player puzzle that 1 hour on a Wednesday in the middle of May is, if you don't get the whole session done in terms of the format you wanted, is, it's a very small amount of the puzzle that a journey could be 10, 15, 20 years long. Yeah. So I'd say to coaches, there's no rush.
Yeah, I think it's always dangerous looking at session by session, isn't it? I mean, really, you want to be looking at least probably 6 weeks at a time, if not 6 months and longer at a time, because it takes pressure off you as the coach. It gives the players an opportunity to really understand what you're working on, those concepts. And never, like you shouldn't reflect on a game by game as a player or a coach. Certainly don't reflect on yourself session by session as a coach, because it doesn't always go right, does it? And actually, it's okay if it doesn't, because that might be a building block to the next session or the session after that when you see the progress.
And also, if you don't get through a session plan, the kids don't know.
No.
Unless you send them the session plan and they go and read it like homework, that they're not going to know. And having worked in education, one of the first things I got told was it's a bit of an act.
Yeah,
we have to play it.
Yeah. If you were doing a particular topic with your players in the hockey environment, how would you use techniques to manipulate that topic out in a games-based way?
Yep. So number one, I'd work backwards from the game. So I'd review the game, whether that's our team or at the top level, I'd review what the game is asking players, so the dynamics of it. And then I'd pick out an area of focus. So an example might be a ball carry. So we want players to break lines with the ball. And then how would I put that into a game? Number one, I'd pitch geography. And again, a term I took from football was, where are we going to do the exercise? So if I'm going to do the exercise in a very tight, in our own half exercise, that's probably not where the players are going to see it and feel it. So I'd probably do it in the opponent's half. And then I'd talk about the size. So if we want players to carry the ball, there's got to be space for them to travel. So if there's no space because the pitch is really narrow, really tight, and there's lots of players on the pitch, they're probably not going to travel because they can't do it. And then I'd look at some sort of scoring system and some sort of challenge to be a motivator to promote that. So I don't always want it to be the option that you carry, but there's an element of decision making. So do they carry or do they pass? So we might say, for every 5 meters you carry the ball, you get a bonus point. So you allow the decision and the creativity there to find the space. But if there's not 5 meters ahead of you, you have to pass the ball. So you're not limiting them, but you're creating the opportunity and the space for them to do that. And the game would ask questions of that. And then I'd probably might go one team larger than the other. So I might go 5v6, something like that. And then I'd probably allow sidelines. And in hockey, we have self-pass. So the rules, you can literally self-pass the ball. And I suppose for a football context, that might be a rule that you could bring into training if you are working on dribbling, that you self-pass. So you create more opportunities to dribble. So I think, Scott, work backwards from the game, add a score motivator, and we'll work out where you're going to do it and how big it's going to be on the pitch.
How important is it to be careful that you don't over-constrain? You mentioned it then about you don't want to put in a rule that kind of means that you have to do this, because then there's a danger you're taking away, well, it becomes unrealistic, but also you're taking away decisions. Is that a risk, and is it something that you're conscious of when you're putting your sessions together?
Yeah, massive. I think there's two sides of it. So I want a framework that would allow for enough flexibility. So we do a lot of work to principles of play, so that would allow for that flexibility. But also, what does the constraint ask of the opponents is another side to think of it. So if you're going to add one rule in, what does that ask for the team out of possession? I try and stay away from limiting touches. I do in certain areas for certain reasons, if that's the session focus, but I don't necessarily want to limit that. So I would often use time as a constraint rather than touches. Just a bit of a personal preference that you don't want to limit that too much. And I think you can be creative with 2-touch, 100%. But if that's 2 seconds or 3 seconds, it just allows a little bit extra movement in that framework.
Jack, would you give players separate challenges potentially, or would it always be like a team by team challenge?
Yeah, do different stuff. So might give one challenge to one team. Can the opposition then recognise that? So, there's a team without a challenge and they're playing with a bit more freedom potentially. So I think there's that element of team challenge. And then there's kind of stretch and support. So who needs a bit of stretching? So who needs pulling in a certain direction? And then there's that support element of, push. So can push them to do something, can support them with that. So there'd be 2 words that I would use of stretch and support. And again, there's some individual, challenges around that you can bring that to life.
And then just finally, I guess, I don't know the situation out there in Australia Perth at the moment, but I'm assuming there's some form of lockdown going on and limited access to your players. How are you managing that, and how are the players managing?
Yeah. So the kids have just gone back to school. We've just started training. And I say training, we have to be 1.5 meters apart. So I think we're going to
including
be really
the
good
players?
Everyone. Yeah. Right. So we're allowed 20 players per half of the pitch. No shared equipment. So there's a lot of high ball kind of rolling time, a lot of ball manipulation stuff, which is great. From a coaching point of view, I've definitely struggled to get intensity in there, game-related intensity. We try to get some decisions in there. So a lot of interception kind of exercises, a lot of zone work where players have to be in certain zones. I think we're going to be really good at intercepting the ball when we go back because they wouldn't have tackled for months. But it's taken a bit of time. But ultimately, the players just want to touch the ball. So there's been a lot of, high ball to player ratio and just, giving them a bit of freedom to pretty much just get on the pitch and do what they like in a way.
It must feel a bit different to a normal session though, obviously, because particularly when you've kind of got a game-based approach to your session where it's a bit more chaos, obviously more games happening and stuff. So has it been a challenge for you, Jack, trying to think of different ways to get the players engaged using different practices?
Yeah, I think there's 2 big challenges. One, I found it pretty hard to interact with the players because you can't go and give a high five or a hug or whatever that might be because you have to social distance, which is one challenge.
Virtual high fives, isn't it now?
Yeah, it is.
Not quite the same.
And then the game related stuff, we've gone to kind of add in 2 different teams against each other. So whether there's some sort of relay or challenge, they have to try and do that against an opposition. So rather than a direct opposition, it's just someone next door to them. Lots of time challenges. How many can you get done? Kind of score related stuff. So there's elements of gaming kind of in there, but not the amount that we'd probably like. So I think it's about refining what we want, and then hopefully when we go into the games and back to full contact, we'll be in a good position.
When are you hoping for that to happen? Is there any kind of indication?
It's a golden question, and I've taken the approach I won't believe it till I see it. So I think it's going to probably be about 4 weeks from today. Okay. So what will be the 19th of May. So potentially 4 weeks. We have 3 cases active in Perth, in WA, in the state. So hopefully in the next 4 weeks we'll have half the season at least.
Well, fingers crossed. You're ahead of the curve compared to where we are in the UK. So I think there's no light at the moment for us. We just can't do anything. We're doing stuff online with the boys and just sharing some ideas and different challenges each week, physical and creative stuff, but it's not the same. And I think it's been 8 weeks now, and I think we're at least another 6 to 12 weeks away from probably getting anywhere close to doing anything session wise. So it's frustrating, but it is what it is, right? The most important thing is
it's a golden opportunity. It's a golden opportunity for players to get better, to watch, whether that's on YouTube, and for coaches, there's a lot of content out there, and just ask people questions. It's a golden opportunity.
It's a good time for some self-development, right?
Massively.
Well, final question, if that's okay. We do like to ask coaches this one question. If they were in charge, they were king for the day, what one thing would they like to change or improve about coaching? It's often targeted at grassroots football coaches, but it doesn't matter. So it's really anything from your perspective of things. If you're in charge, what would you like to change or improve around coaching?
I think my biggest one would be games format and a games program. I think I asked myself, what's the smallest thing that will make the biggest difference? And to me, it's the types of games that our kids are playing. So, and as I said it earlier, there's no rush. So we don't want kids playing 11v11, by a certain age, and be really structured around that. I think the smaller the better, because it promotes skill sets that are easier to develop and better to develop at that younger foundation phase age. That you can't buy back that valuable time. So I think the games format and the games program would be my thing. And also in terms of that games program, playing different styles of games, not always playing the same style of game every single weekend. Can we mix it up? Can we go and speak to another local club that fancies doing something a bit different to support the players in front of us?
What, like, Jack? Do you mean like having like 2 goals either end, or doing something that's kind of different scoring format or something?
Yeah, there's stuff like that. In hockey, we would often cut the pitch in half. So we'd play, rather than play 11v11, we'd end up going and play 11v11 in a much smaller area. So that would ask different questions of players. So that would be number one. Even stuff like having a joint halftime team talk with the opposition. Yeah. Why can't that be in the games program? Or having your pre-match briefing with the opposition. So there's some sort of challenge and he can self-challenge. So not necessarily the format all the time, but the stuff that surrounds it. Why can't we go and play the game in quarters? That would ask different questions of players. You might, or best of 5, go and play 10 minutes as best of 5. So there's a competition element from that side of it.
Sounds superb. I think there's been some movement on this basis in football, and you've seen the benefits of it. Obviously, they start a 5-a-side now rather than used to be 7 or even 9 or 11s, but it's 5-a-side now. I think even for us, we play a lot of 2v2 and 3v3 with the younger age groups. We do these things called collaborative training matches, and we did something. So before the coronavirus thing kicked in, we played a team localish, not the one we play regularly, but localish to us. And we did a mixed pre-match warm-up. So all the players from both teams came in. We mixed those up into 2 teams, but mixed, and they played some little 2v2, 3v3 games against each other, but with boys from their team and another team on the same thing. So it was just a different way of seeing it. And these are under 8. So it was funny because it did impact on the game. The game, I would say, lost a little bit of its competitive edge because the boys didn't feel like they were competing as much, which was a good thing. And it kind of, you could see the players having to psychologically deal with a different situation, meeting somebody new, getting to know them, what their strengths are and things. So it presented a whole opportunity of just learning different stuff beyond just the result of a match.
I think it's important that, the focus is football, but what else can you learn through football and through sport? And that social stuff that you picked up on there is crucial. And we're in a prime position as coaches to allow the opportunities for that to happen. And I believe it's our duty to do that, is to create opportunities for players to connect and to share.
Jack, thank you so much for your time. I think your insight's been fascinating around learning environments and obviously game-based coaching. The work you're doing with the coaching lab is testament to obviously 18 months of hard work from your part, but also, but more than that, I guess it's your whole experience, your own coaching journey, your own playing journey, the research you put into this, and to produce a product at the end that is going to probably influence and impact on so many coaches that is going to allow them to give a better experience to their players, which is our key message in this podcast all the time. It's just trying to give the players the best possible experience we can. I think is fantastic, Jack. So well done for the work you're doing, and please keep it up. I imagine. What's next for you? What is the plans?
What's next? It's a good question. I think I'll be back in England kind of in the next few months for a bit of more time. There's a couple of different projects with different organisations and whatever, but ultimately, Scott, I want to support more people and more coaches and clubs. So looking to do a bit more coach development stuff and just go and help coaches, go and give them a hand and support their players, and I think that's really, really valuable.
Well, when you're back in the UK, Jack, we're not too far from you, I don't think. So you have to come and see us, all right? We'd love to have you down with us and do some work with the players in our club. We'd love to have you if you've got some time. And please let us know if you develop any more resources around the coaching lab and the cards and stuff, because we'll keep an eye out for those. If listeners want to reach out to you, Jack, what's the best way of getting to you?
Yeah, so you can drop me an email on info@thecoachinglab.org. And then I'm across Twitter as well. So _coaching lab. or my one is JPR_25. And we've got a website as well, www.thecoachinglab.org. So, jump on there as well.
Brilliant. We'll put all that in the show notes, Jack, so everyone can get that information too. Best of luck for the rest of the time in Australia, and I hope things get sorted out there nice and quickly. And if you don't mind, please do give us a shout when you're back in the UK, and maybe we can either come and see one of your sessions, or we'd love to have you come down and see one of ours if you've got some time, Jack.
No, awesome. And it's one thing I probably should have said at the start was I think it's good that coaches, connect and share and, go and see each other, go and see different sports. So, I'm definitely open to go and see loads of different stuff. So, thanks for having me on, Scott.
Top man. Thanks, Jack. Speak to you soon.
All the best, mate.